Welcome to Lighthouse Bitesize. In Sheringham, we're in the middle of celebrating the 1940s weekend, which is a big do for us, with thousands coming from all over the country. And it's the first one as we've come back from lockdown. It's great. It's a great celebration of life during the Second World War, of just celebrating that sense of community and the common values that held our nation together at that time. But it's also this year, with the death of Queen Elizabeth, a sense of reflecting. In fact, just this afternoon, the town gathered at the parish church just to give thanks to God for the life of Queen Elizabeth. You know, it makes us think at this time, how does our past influence the future? How do we go forward from this point with God in our lives as individuals and as a nation? I've got two stones on my desk, and this is one of them. It's just like a crummy piece of rock, but it's actually the broken up piece of an old track, a tank track off the beaches just outside Southampton, where the D-Day's armies were launched towards Europe. Many years ago, I was on that beach with a number of leaders praying for the Europe and the spread of the gospel again in the continent of Europe. It was an incredible time. Each leader that was there took a piece of this crumbling track to remind them of one thing: the gospel means advance. Advance to a sin-free future because of Christ. Advance to a better community because with Christ in our lives we become human. Advance to a better world because when we know Jesus Christ and his truth, it transforms our hearts towards the nations and the needs of our world. So enjoy our 1940s bite size, and we're thinking about the Second World War. Be challenged by the story of the Pegasus Bridge. But where in your life is God saying, advance rather than stand still? Enjoy.
June the 6th, 1944, a date etched in history as D-Day. An invasion took place here in Normandy that brought the curtain down on a global conflict that took the lives of over 50 million people. The Bible graphically portrays the human problem. War will only cease when the war is won within the human heart. D-Day was the largest amphibious assault in history. 150,000 men and 50,000 vehicles were landed along a 50-mile stretch of coast by 4,000 landing craft, supported by 3,000 warships and 12,000 warplanes, equivalent in scale to transporting a medium-sized city 100 miles across the sea in one day in complete secrecy. As the future of the entire free world hung so desperately in the balance, political and military leaders alike feared and even predicted a catastrophe. The man in charge of it all was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. He would later become the 34th President of the United States of America. He had 2 press releases written for the world's media. The one taking personal responsibility for the appalling loss of tens of thousands of young lives was never read out. D-Day was a stunning success, thanks in the main to the many individual stories of heroism. Many of the heroes that day carried with them a small pocket Bible in their uniform. I guess when the bullets are flying and the mortars are exploding, it rather focuses the mind somewhat on the big questions of life, whatever side you're fighting for. Is there meaning to this life? What happens afterwards? Does God exist? And can he be known? The task of the British 6th Airborne Division was to seize and hold the eastern flank of the invasion. To do that, they needed to capture that bridge intact and hold it until relieved. The mission was carried out by 180 men of the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry Division 2nd Battalion under the leadership of Major John Howard. The story is legendary. 6 Halifax bombers, each towing a Horsa glider, nicknamed the Hearse in a touch of airborne gallows humour, departed RAF Tarrant Rushton in Dorset. As they crossed the occupied French coastline, the gliders were released and the Halifaxes went on to bomb the city of Caen as a diversion. The parachutes at the rear of the gliders were deployed, but they still came down at 100 miles an hour, skidding on the mud. There's no sophisticated way to bring a Horsa glider down, and even before the action started, the men on board were in grave danger of serious injury or even death. The 4 glider pilots charged with the job of landing the men to attack the bridge landed within 50 yards of the target. It was an example of stunning precision flying and one of those heroic contributions that day that is so often airbrushed out of the story.
If somebody come to me now and said you're going to take a wooden aeroplane with no engines, fly it 6 miles in the dark and land in a field half the size of a football pitch, I would ask to be excused, you know. But in those days you couldn't.
The little Bible that many of the men carried in their breast pocket portrays a picture of Jesus as the bridge to God, the route through, the divine connector the place of crossing and the access point. He's how we get from where we are to where we need to be, bridging the chasm between a God who is perfect and the rest of us who are not. After a fierce 10-minute firefight, the bridge was under Allied control. It was all over by 12:26 a.m, 6 hours before the landings on the beaches, and only 90 minutes after the gliders left RAF Tarrant Rushden back in England. In honour of the British 6th Airborne Division and their flying horse emblem, the bridge was renamed Pegasus Bridge. Den Brotheridge led the first attack onto the bridge, firing from the hip, but was shot through the neck halfway across. He was just an ordinary lad like all the others in his 20s, a very talented footballer who'd signed for Aston Villa before the war. He had a daughter who was born 2 weeks after D-Day. He never saw her. Brotheridge became the first fatality on D-Day. Following the British landings, the battalion were relieved by 6th Commando, who were part of the 1st Special Service Brigade, who had departed from Warsash near Southampton the night before. They were commanded by an upper-class Scotsman called Brigadier Lord Lovat. It's impossible to tell this part of the story without mentioning another chap called Bill Millin. He became known as the Mad Piper of Normandy. Traditionally, the bagpipes were played at the head of every Irish and Scottish regiment in battle, but by World War II they were really only seen as ceremonial. Lovat insisted that the men were piped onto Sword Beach by 21-year-old Private Millin, insisting that the English War Office had no jurisdiction over either of them because they were both Scots. So the young unarmed piper led the whole brigade into combat, playing Road to the Isles and Highland Laddie. The gripping story of Pegasus Bridge has stood the test of time, and it's a place that I've been to many times. I do understand that not everyone signs up to the Christian worldview, but for me it is a poignant reminder of a bridge that was secured at tremendous cost. The bridge back to God was also secured at a high price, the life and death of Jesus Christ, his Son. Through the sacrifice of that one life, the power of death was disarmed, and the way back to God was made open for each one of us, back to a God who both created us and loves us. On the far side of the bridge is the Gondray Cafe that is still owned by the same family that owned it on D-Day. It was quickly turned into a field hospital to care for Den Brotheridge and then for other paratroopers who were caught up in the battle. It's now a living memorial to the British 6th Airborne Division and also a place of personal pilgrimage. Every year on June the 6th since 1944, the veterans have returned in ever decreasing numbers to remember the days when they were young men in uniform and to honour the fallen. Pegasus Bridge and the Gondray Cafe epitomise the immense contribution of the British forces on D-Day. Most of the men who died in the fighting around here are buried in the British cemetery up the road in Romville. It is a reminder of the tragic loss of so many young lives, people who never made it out of Normandy. Some of the inscriptions on the headstones carry these words, "Known unto God." Those tragic words represent the absence of closure for so many families whose sons were never identified. The expression was first used by Rudyard Kipling, the famous poet and author. His son died in Ypres in 1915 in the First World War. His grave was never identified until 1992. Rudyard Kipling had died many years before, still searching for his son. Known unto God on a headstone is desperately sad, but it also reflects a profound truth. It means that we are created by Him, not simply evolved through a random process of selection. But here's the thing that is so powerful. We are known by God, but we are also invited to know Him in return. That is possible because of Jesus, and it is the greatest reality that we can ever experience.
Fill this place with the praises of God tonight. Everyone needs compassion, a love that's never failing. With their mercy for long, and everyone needs forgiveness, the kindness of the Savior, the hope of the nation. As you find me, all my fears and failure, and live my life again. I give my life to follow everything I believe in. Now I surrender. Say
What a great video that was from Steve, explaining some of the different things about Pegasus Bridge and the men that fought there. And one of the things that Steve picked up on was the fact that each individual that took part in that would have had a small Bible in their top pocket, carrying it with them. And this is a small replica of one that they would have carried during World War I. And in the back of it, there is a thing called a decision form, but it's really like a prayer. And I'm just going to read that for us as we reflect on what Steve has said. Being convinced that I am a sinner and believing that Christ died for me, I now receive him as my personal saviour. And with his help, I intend to confess him before men. John 1 verse 12. Yet all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God.
The universe is held within your hands, and all the earth bows down at your command. The wonder of creation will testify to all you've done. From age to age, your promises have stood. You reign as king, just like you said you would. And every generation will testify to all you've done. To all you've done. To God be the glory. To God be the glory. Oh, you have done great things. You will never change. To God be the glory. Oh yes. The deaf can hear, the broken live again, the blind can see, the sinner is a friend, and love's a renovation will testify to all you've done. Sing our hearts.